A photograph, grainy and blurred, shows the Yamashiro's massive hull listing sharply to starboard, half submerged in the murky waters of the Surigao Strait. The date, October 25, 1944. A broken radio intercept, recovered decades later, captures fragmented Japanese commands, desperate and disjointed as the battleship's fate unfolds. How could a vessel that once symbolized the might of the Imperial Japanese Navy end in such chaotic ruin? The Yamashiro, pride of the fleet, was not merely sunk, it was shattered in a battle where technology, strategy, and morale collided, leaving a wound deeper than steel could mend. What was the true cost behind this loss, and why did it mark the collapse of an era for Japanese admirals? The Yamashiro was commissioned in 1917, a product of interwar naval ambition and a symbol of Japan's growing imperial reach. For decades, she embodied the prestige of the battleship class: big guns, thick armor, and an imposing silhouette designed to dominate the Pacific. But by 1944, the tides of war had shifted. The Japanese Navy faced an existential crisis, torn between tradition and the harsh realities of modern warfare. Archival records from the Imperial Navy's General Staff reveal bitter debates. Some commanders clung to the battleship's supremacy. Others urged a pivot toward air power and submarines. A meticulously preserved blueprint from Mitsubishi's archives shows the Yamashiro's outdated main battery. 10 14-inch guns, formidable yet outmatched by newer Allied vessels. How did such pride become a liability? Was the Yamashiro doomed by its own legacy, locked in a battle it was no longer equipped to win? The design of the Yamashiro, a testament to early 20th century naval engineering, was both its strength and its fatal weakness. Displacing over 32,000 tons, with armor up to 14 inches thick, it was built to withstand heavy shell fire. Yet its speed, just over 25 knots, and anti-aircraft defenses lagged behind evolving threats. Reports from the ship's officers describe the cramped interior, the echo of heavy machinery, and the stifling heat below decks. Radar, a game-changer in Pacific warfare, was rudimentary or absent. According to a war diary from the ship's engineering officer, the Yamashiro's outdated fire control systems struggled to track fast-moving aircraft and smaller vessels. Could the battleship's very design have made it a sitting target in the deadly maze of the Surigao Strait? Why did the Navy fail to modernize this pride of the fleet before the decisive battle? On the night of October 24th to 25th, 1944, the Yamashiro was part of Vice Admiral Nishimura's Southern Force, tasked with passing through the narrow Surigao Strait to attack Allied forces landing on Leyte Island. The plan was bold but flawed. Break through with a last, desperate surface engagement. U.S. Navy forces, anticipating this move, set a deadly trap, positioning destroyers and PT boats for torpedo attacks, supported by battleships and cruisers, waiting in ambush. The Yamashiro was hit by multiple torpedoes early in the engagement, causing severe flooding and power loss. Survivor testimonies describe the eerie glow of fires below decks and the relentless thunder of enemy shells. How did the Japanese command overlook the risk of such a choke point? Was this a tactical blunder or an unavoidable sacrifice? The U.S. forces had refined their tactics to counter battleship dominance. Coordinated torpedo strikes, combined with radar-guided gunfire, overwhelmed traditional defenses. The Yamashiro's anti-aircraft guns were largely ineffective, and its crew struggled to respond to fast-moving, multi-vector attacks. Radio logs intercepted after the battle reveal confusion and desperation as the ship's command tried to maneuver under fire. Meanwhile, Allied reports highlight the precision of the coordinated assault. Destroyers launched torpedoes from multiple angles, crippling the battleship's mobility. The Yamashiro, once a symbol of invincibility, was now a vulnerable target. What does this say about the evolution of naval warfare And why were Japanese countermeasures insufficient at this critical juncture? As the Yamashiro began to sink, the crew faced a grim reality. Orders to abandon ship came too late for many. According to declassified survivor accounts, the captain chose to go down with the ship, a final act of honor in a fading tradition. The loss of the Yamashiro was not just a tactical defeat, it was a symbolic death knell for the Imperial Japanese Navy's battleship era. The Surigao Strait had become a graveyard for pride and power, a place where the old naval doctrine met its brutal end. A map recovered from the wreck site, annotated by U.S. Navy intelligence, shows the choke points exploited by Allied forces, proof of a meticulously executed plan that shattered the last vestiges of Japanese surface fleet dominance. How did this single battle reshape naval strategy, and what was left for the Japanese admirals to cling to afterward? The sinking of the Yamashiro was more than the loss of a ship. It was the collapse of a proud tradition. For Japanese admirals, the battleship was a symbol of national strength and naval honor. Its destruction at Surigao Strait represented the end of their pride. The defeat exposed vulnerabilities that reverberated through the Imperial Navy's command structure, accelerating Japan's strategic shift toward desperate measures in the war's closing months. Every shell that struck the Yamashiro echoed a larger narrative, the clash between old and new, pride and survival. Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. In the immediate aftermath of the Yamashiro's sinking, the Imperial Japanese Navy's internal communications were suffused with a grim silence, punctuated only by terse reports and fragmented orders. The loss was not just a tactical failure. It was a psychological blow that reverberated through the highest echelons. A classified memorandum from the Naval General Staff, dated November 1944, reveals an undercurrent of despair. Phrases like irreparable damage to morale and loss of symbol hint at a fracture in the naval hierarchy's confidence. The Yamashiro was more than a vessel. It was a floating bastion of tradition and pride. Its destruction in the Surigao Strait, under conditions that some officers termed avoidable, raised a haunting question. Had the pride of the Imperial Navy blinded its leaders to the changing face of warfare? A faded photograph from a post-battle briefing shows admirals' faces, grim, exhausted, and haunted. What secrets lay behind those eyes? And how did this defeat reshape their vision for the future? The strategic implications of the Yamashiro's loss rippled quickly through Japan's war plans. A detailed War Council transcript, partially redacted, records heated debates over whether to continue deploying battleships in surface engagements or to shift resources toward aircraft carriers and submarines. The Yamashiro's sinking exposed the vulnerability of aging capital ships in a conflict increasingly dominated by air power and radar-guided precision. Intelligence reports from the U.S. Navy, later declassified, document the surprise and satisfaction among Allied commanders who saw in the battle a confirmation of their evolving naval doctrine. Yet, within Japanese circles, there was a bitter struggle to reconcile pride with necessity. A weathered map of the Pacific theater, marked with shifting naval assets, illustrates the gradual withdrawal of battleships from frontline roles. Why did some admirals resist change, even as the evidence mounted? What internal conflicts shaped Japan's final naval strategies? Behind the scenes, efforts to salvage the remnants of the Yamashiro's crew and assess the wreck's damage began immediately. Divers' logs, preserved in naval archives, describe the eerie task of exploring the ship's submerged hull. Twisted armor plates, shattered gun turrets, and the ghostly silence of empty compartments. The physical destruction mirrored the intangible loss felt by survivors and commanders alike. A survivor's diary entry, found decades later, recounts the chaos of abandoning ship, the acrid smell of smoke and fuel, oil, and the suffocating weight of defeat. This personal account contrasts sharply with official reports that framed the battle as a valiant stand. What was the truth hidden beneath layers of propaganda and honor-bound silence? How did these conflicting narratives shape post-war memory and historiography? In the wake of the Yamashiro's demise, the Japanese Navy accelerated efforts to modernize remaining vessels, incorporating lessons painfully learned. Technical manuals from late 1944 outline hurried upgrades, enhanced radar systems, improved anti-aircraft batteries, and revised tactical doctrines emphasizing combined arms and air support. However, resource shortages and Allied bombing campaigns hampered these initiatives. Correspondence between shipyard engineers and naval command highlights frustration. Plans drafted with urgency met with delays and material scarcity. A schematic of retrofitted gun mounts reveals the patchwork nature of these modifications, a stark contrast to the sleek designs of earlier years. Did these changes come too late, or could they have altered the course of the Navy's final battles? What hidden struggles lay beneath the official facade of resilience? Meanwhile, the psychological impact on the crews and officers who survived the Surigao Strait engagement was profound. Memoirs collected from veterans decades later speak of a lingering sense of betrayal, of being sent to certain death under outdated doctrines and inadequate support. The cultural weight of the Yamashiro's loss seeped into the collective consciousness of the naval community, influencing training, discipline, and morale. A rare, candid interview with a former squadron commander reveals a shattered faith in the leadership's strategic judgment, hinting at fractures within the officer corps. How did these wounds affect subsequent naval operations? Was the loss of pride as damaging as the loss of men and material? The final days of the Yamashiro's story unfolded amid the broader collapse of Japan's Pacific defenses. As Allied forces advanced, the Imperial Navy's battleships became increasingly irrelevant against overwhelming air and submarine attacks. Official dispatches from late 1944 described the gradual withdrawal of surface fleets, with many ships relegated to secondary roles or scuttled to prevent capture. The Yamashiro's destruction had become a grim symbol of obsolescence. A haunting image from a reconnaissance photo shows the rusting hulk of another battleship abandoned in a harbor, a visual echo of Yamashiro's fate. What did the loss of such a proud vessel mean for the identity of the Japanese Navy? And how did it shape Japan's naval legacy in the post-war world? In the months that followed Surigao Strait, the Yamashiro's sinking cast a long shadow over the Imperial Japanese Navy's strategic decisions. Internal reports from late 1944 emphasize a growing crisis of confidence among naval commanders. A confidential assessment by the Naval War College, uncovered in post-war archives, bluntly states that battleships like Yamashiro were ill-suited to contemporary naval warfare. Yet paradoxically, these same documents reveal a stubborn attachment to the battleship's symbolic value. A faded photograph from a secret meeting shows senior admirals gathered around a large map, their faces etched with tension and reluctance. The question lingers: why did the Navy's leadership cling to a doctrine that had been so decisively broken? Was it mere tradition or a deeper fear of admitting the end of their era? At the operational level, the loss of Yamashiro forced a painful reevaluation of resource allocation. Shipbuilding records from the period detail a shift in priorities. Resources previously earmarked for battleship maintenance were diverted to aircraft carriers and kamikaze units. This shift was not smooth. Internal correspondence reveals bitter debates between the old guard and younger officers pushing for modernization. A weathered telegram from a squadron commander criticizes the waste of men and steel on relics, while warning that the enemy's air power will determine the war's outcome. Amidst this turmoil, the Yamashiro's fate became a rallying point for the advocates of change, a stark example of the price paid for clinging to obsolete ideals. How deeply did this internal conflict affect Japan's naval effectiveness in the war's final campaigns? The psychological aftermath among survivors and the broader naval community was profound. Personal letters and diaries, now declassified, reveal a pervasive sense of loss, not only of comrades, but of identity. One poignant entry, penned by a junior officer aboard the Yamashiro, laments the death of our pride, sunk beneath waves of fire and smoke. These sentiments were echoed in post-war interviews, where veterans grappled with the dual shame of defeat and the collapse of a centuries-old naval tradition. The Yamashiro had been more than a warship. It was a floating symbol of Japan's imperial aspirations, and its destruction shattered the morale of many who saw their nation's honor entwined with its hull. How did this collective trauma influence Japan's naval culture in the decades that followed? Was the loss ever fully reconciled? Meanwhile, Allied intelligence exploited the Yamashiro's sinking as a propaganda tool, highlighting it as evidence of Japanese naval inferiority. Leaflets dropped over Japanese-held islands featured stark images of the battleship ablaze, accompanied by messages urging surrender. Yet behind these public displays, U.S. naval analysts studied the engagement with clinical interest. Technical reports praised the coordinated use of radar, torpedoes, and air power that had overwhelmed the Yamashiro's defenses. A declassified intelligence briefing describes the battle as a textbook case in the obsolescence of battleship-centric strategy. The Allies' mastery of integrated warfare had turned the tide decisively. Could the Imperial Navy have anticipated such rapid technological shifts, or was the Yamashiro's fate sealed by rigid adherence to tradition? Efforts to honor the Yamashiro and her crew persisted despite the defeat. Memorials erected in Japan's naval bases bore plaques inscribed with names of the lost, casting the ship's final battle as a testament to courage and sacrifice. Official ceremonies emphasized loyalty and duty, framing the sinking as a tragic but noble chapter. Yet, privately, many officers questioned the cost. Memoirs published decades later reveal a nuanced portrait. Admiration for the crew's bravery, tempered by bitter criticism of strategic missteps. A preserved speech by a retired admiral reflects on the futility of pride without adaptation, suggesting that Yamashiro's loss forced a painful reckoning with the past. How did these competing narratives shape Japan's post-war naval identity? And what lessons were truly learned? In the final analysis, the Yamashiro's destruction was a fulcrum on which Japan's naval fortunes turned irreversibly. The vessel's obsolescence, combined with tactical errors and overwhelming Allied firepower, culminated in a defeat that transcended the immediate battlefield. Detailed battle maps, survivor testimonies, and archival communications coalesce into a portrait of a navy caught between eras, proud yet unprepared, valiant yet vulnerable. The Admiralty's identification of Yamashiro as the end of pride was both a literal and symbolic reckoning. The last battleship to embody an imperial dream, sunk in the crucible of modern warfare. What remains is a haunting question that echoes through history. Could the pride that built Yamashiro have also doomed her? In the years following the war, the legacy of the Yamashiro endured in unexpected ways. Declassified naval archives reveal that its wreck was studied extensively by both Japanese and Allied naval engineers, becoming a somber classroom for understanding the limits of battleship design under modern combat conditions. Underwater photographs show the ravaged hull, corroded yet stubbornly intact, an underwater monument to a bygone era. Veterans associations held annual commemorations, their gatherings marked by quiet reflection rather than triumphant celebration. A rare interview with a former naval engineer recalls how the Yamashiro's loss forced a generational shift in thinking, from steel and guns to speed and air dominance. This evolution was not merely technological but cultural, reshaping Japan's post-war maritime identity. How does a nation reconcile the pride of its past with the necessity of change? What does the Yamashiro teach us about the cost of clinging to fading glories?